Yes, I am.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the Well Man's Podcast. My name is Bryan Brozy. I'm joined by my friend and co-host Keoni Tita. Keoni, how are you today?
I'm good. Hey, everybody. Thanks once again for listening to us. Hopefully you get a lot out of this. This is going to be on shoulder anatomy, all things shoulder. And I can tell you as an acupuncturist, I see shoulder stuff all the time, um, especially with older people. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I see frozen shoulder constantly now. And
Mhm.
I- it's like keep that mobility, keep the shoulders healthy, and you won't have to deal with that nonsense.
Yeah, we did do a whole episode on adhesive capsulitis or frozen shoulder,
Yeah.
which you
Yeah.
just mentioned. So you can go back and listen to that. But yeah, just like you mentioned, Keoni, this episode is really to kind of orient you to your shoulders. And like you said, a lot of people as they age see more and more shoulder problems because we kind of fall into these bad postures, these bad habits, and it ends up being, a long-term cumulative thing that leads to maybe a specific acute injury. But it is that long-term buildup that we see in a lot of older patients. Like a lot of guys get rotator cuff tears and things like that. And a lot of that can be avoided by some of the things we're going to talk about in this episode.
Yeah, it's great. I see
So
tons of patients with this issue.
the first thing is always awareness and like orienting to the body parts we're talking about and becoming aware with how they move. So when we're talking about the shoulder, we're actually talking about three bones. We've got the clavicle, the shoulder blade or the scapula, and then the humerus, the arm bone, right? So all these are working together, and that's actually your whole, other than your forearm and hand, that's your whole upper extremity that attaches to your axial skeleton there just by the clavicle. So that's always super interesting to me. Your whole upper arm via bone is just attached right at your clavicle with that little pivot joint there.
Yeah.
The shoulder is designed for mobility. So when we think about like the hip and the shoulder, the two differences between them, we know they're both ball and socket joints, which means they generally have a lot of mobility. The difference between the hip and the shoulder is the shoulder is a lot more mobile because the joint sits like a golf ball sitting on a golf tee versus with the hip, it's more like a golf ball sitting in a shot glass. So when you think about kind of the stability or the natural passive stability of the bone structure there's obviously a lot more in that shot glass with the golf ball, aka the hip, than there is in the shoulder where we have like a golf ball sitting on a small golf tee.
Right.
So that
I've seen
speaks
numerous people just doing nothing and knock their shoulder out of, dislocate their shoulder pretty much
right,
if
and
it's
that
not stable.
exactly, and that speaks to that's just super easy
Yeah.
to happen, super common to happen because of that structure of those bones.
Yeah.
And then with shoulder anatomy and kind of our overall shoulder health in the long term, we want to know that really a lot of this, and I talk to my patients a lot and my clients a lot about this, it all starts at the scapula. So the scapula is going to really drive the positioning of the arm and how everything intricately works together. I call the shoulder an orchestra of movement, and we'll kind of detail that in a little bit. But it really does take such a orchestrated effort on a lot of different structures to create your shoulder's movement. So I tell people start thinking about the scapula and stabilizing and getting an idea of, where your scapula is in space because 16 muscles attached to the scapula and all of these are impacting your shoulder, your glenohumeral joint to some capacity, right? Because they're pulling and changing the alignment of things. So some things we can see with the scapula, there's a lot of different things that can go wrong. There's a lot of different differences between people and their shoulder blades and like durochromium, those processes, little things that pinpoint or stick out there. But for the purpose of this episode, I really just want to talk about winging of the scapula a little bit, which we see kind of common, which is where that you picture the shoulder blade sitting flat along someone's back. And as they lift their arm or do some type of shoulder movement, that scapula starts to almost like a book kind of open up off of their shoulder blade. And that would be winging of the scapula. And there can be a variety of reasons for that, but it's due to some loss of normal scapular stability. And it can often be the serratus anterior, can be even the traps, excessive shortening of the pec muscles, some actual stiffness to the joint capsule, because again, there's a lot of things at play involved in this movement here. And then there's scapular dyskinesia, which is a word that's tossed around, which just means poor scapula movement. And again, if we start thinking about our shoulder health, if we start at the scapula, that really dictates and is kind of the guy with the pointy stick who's at the guy with the pointy stick at the orchestra who's actually directing everybody.
Yeah.
That's the shoulder blade.
Okay.
So those are just some general things about the shoulder blade. Some important anatomy to think about with the shoulder is that we obviously have our rotator cuff that provides a lot of stability for that golf ball and that golf tee. And you alluded to it earlier, Keoni, that it does dislocate a lot. So this shoulder or the rotator cuff muscles are super important for your overall shoulder health. And those are, there's an acronym for it, SITS. So your serratus anterior, subscapular, or supraspinatus, teres minor, and infraspinatus. So SITS, your sits muscles. There's also the biceps tendon. People often have a lot of problems with their biceps tendon. It's just important to be aware that one thing that's interesting about the biceps tendon is it actually attaches to the joint capsule of the shoulder. So often if people do like a slap tear, you may have heard of that, or some sort of labral tear, the biceps tendon can be implicated too. And you can imagine, right, if your long head of your biceps is attaching to the top of your shoulder and providing a little bit of that stability as it goes across your upper arm bone and attaches to your scapula. If you tear that labrum, that shoulder blade is maybe working overtime, or that biceps is maybe working overtime to hold that stability, or because it's located with that labrum, it can tear and kind of rupture from the site it's attached to as well. And speaking of the labrum is what provides that passive stability for that golf ball on that tee. It's kind of like a suction cup and creates a suction-like effect for that golf ball to sit solidly on that tee. So it's important. People tear their labrums all the time, and that's a super common diagnosis, maybe with like a pulling force. There's actually a specific diagnosis where kids get their arms pulled out. I think it's nursemaid's elbow, but it can even go up to the shoulder, where kids are yanked by their arms and it dislocates either their elbow or their shoulder. And that would be, if it was the shoulder, that would be that affecting that labrum. And I've treated patients who have, been riding on a horse and just, I guess they had super relaxed arms. They ended up tearing a labrum from a big jump or something like that. And when you tear that labrum, that golf ball is even more unstable, right? So the muscles are just working overtime to help create that stability now that we lost some of that passive stability.
A labrum tear, is that they're pretty serious as far as, I guess it depends on the type of tear, right? But
yeah,
I hear a lot of times it's a surgical.
Yeah, if you're going to repair the labrum, it is a surgical procedure. Now, if you have a labral tear, depending on the degree of it, do you or do you not need the surgery is definitely a solid question to be asking, because you don't necessarily always need the surgery. Because what we did is we lost a form of passive stability. But what I'm trying to get across by just even talking about this anatomy is we have so much active stability that we need to think about as well. And when we lose that passive stability, we definitely need to orchestrate that active stability even more and more coordinated. But it's to answer your question, you are able, depending on the severity, to live a normal life more or less with a labral tear.
And is that just because the labrum just is hard to, doesn't have a lot of blood flow, just doesn't heal, or
as far as to why it doesn't heal?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just always curious because labrum tears are just always like, it seems like, again, depending on the severity, people are doing a lot of surgery, and I don't know if I guess I'm assuming they just don't heal well. It's hard to get them to heal.
And definitely, it's hard to get your shoulder immobilized for something like that to heal, for 3 to 4 weeks or whatever general.
Yeah, you're right.
And it is most likely the most common labral tear, I believe, is a slap tear, which that just means superior, lateral, anterior, posterior. It means the direction of the tear. And the tear is most commonly on top. And what does gravity do? Pull your arm down, right? So all those little things kind of cumulatively combine to make the healing not so great, like you mentioned.
Okay.
Or that's at least, my assumption of it.
Yeah. One
last thing I want to talk about, because it's very common that people have pain, clicking, locking, popping, or some sort of pain right on top of their shoulder. And there can be a variety of things we've discussed already that can be the culprit for this. But what's happening is we have the coracoacromial arch. So this is where you have the acromion, which is like the hook of your shoulder blade. We have an arch that's made from those two bones connecting from your shoulder blade to your clavicle. And under that arch passes a variety of tissues. So if we, for instance, get our shoulders more protracted, more forward, more anteriorly tilted, more internally rotated, all sorts of postures like that, more in, we can think, kind of turning our shoulders into our chest. We're reducing or kind of compressing that space and the structures that are in there. So for instance, if the space is narrowest, and this is just a fun fact, the space is narrowest between 60 and 120 degrees of scaption. So we can all do this now. Scaption is you just bringing your arm out straight out in front of you at a 45-degree angle. So it's like you're right beside your pocket and just start lifting your arm straight out in front of you at 45 degrees. And that is scaption. As you get through 60 and 120 degrees of that arch is the most narrowest. So if we're in a poor posture already, we're already internally rotated, already anteriorly tilted, already protracted, flexed, whatever it may be on those shoulder blades, we're further decreasing that space. And this is how some people can even get rotator cuff tears or various other musculoskeletal shoulder issues, because that space has narrowed and now you're compressing all those structures.
That's interesting. I have quite a few patients who can't raise their arm past their shoulder.
Yeah, and that raising certain degrees is a specific test for different rotator cuff muscles, different aspects of this, depending on how, if you help them move it, if you do it passively, Keoni, and you hold their shoulder blade and lift it, what does that change? And then that tells us a little bit about what we're doing to that arch and what we may incriminate, testing that. So there's a lot to, the good news is shoulders generally clear up quickly. They take time to fully clear up, but like range of motion, for instance, I've seen people come in and 2 or 3 weeks later have at least full range of motion back. It does, and obviously various diagnosis, that sort of thing, but they clear up quickly, but they take some pretty consistent maintenance. And I believe if you do most of these tips I'm going to give you at the end here in your daily routine, you'll keep healthy shoulders for as long as possible and set them in good position to avoid all these problems. But so that's some of the important anatomy. The labrum, which is that passive structure, passive stability to our shoulder. We have the rotator cuff, which everyone loves talking about and super important for that orchestra of how we move and how our arm moves and does functional task. And then we talked about the biceps tendon, and then the arch that has a bunch of tissues passing underneath it. And we want to put that in good position to have a nice clear highway. We don't want a crowded highway. And muscle imbalances can certainly lead to, problems with everything we discussed there. Rotator cuff weakness, different problems with the labrum, different problems with that arch, and all of that can be can kind of present an upper cross syndrome, which is an episode we did, and we kind of went through how to correct that and address that and see if you have it and that sort of thing. So that's a common way that people present when they have unhealthy shoulders, or upper cross syndrome would definitely set you up for some sort of musculoskeletal issue in your shoulder later in life.
And upper cross syndrome is really that kind of folding in, or is exacerbated, I should say, right? By that kind of crunching in, fold in, shoulders rolled forward.
Yep, exactly.
Kind of getting that, kyphotic curve going in your spine.
So you're exactly right. And we detailed everything about, I think we talked about stretches, strengthening, and some of that we'll go over here, but in that upper cross episode. And then I mentioned kind of this orchestra of motion, and these shoulder muscles move in force couples. So they move in groups. That's why I call it this orchestra of motion, because not one thing is activating by itself and not impacting another, right? At some point, if you lift your arm, there's 5 to 6 plus muscles. There's 16 that attach to the shoulder blade that are tugging in various ways. So we truly do have that orchestra of motion. And just to give you an idea of that, so when we are elevating our arm through flexion, this is straight out in front of us now. The upper and lower fibers of the trap are working concentrically, which means they're shortening. The fibers of that serratus anterior, which is one of the rotator cuff muscles we discussed, they're firing concentrically as well. The levator scapula, which is a muscle that attaches from your shoulder blade to your neck, contracts eccentrically to control some of that shoulder blade motion. And then the rhomboids also contract eccentrically. And those rhomboids are the muscles that kind of sit between the middle of your back. If you had that kyphotic posture you were mentioning too, Keoni, those would probably be weak and stretched out.
Yeah.
So that just gives you an idea of the orchestra that is at play and why we need to train them and address these muscles appropriately and for the demands of coordinated movement altogether. Because that's what we do when we reach out and we try and grab a cup from the cabinet. There's a lot of coordination going on. Some of the muscles, this kind of speaks to the upper cross syndrome, but this just gives a good idea of muscles that are prone to tightness in the shoulder. So these are things you can think about stretching. The upper trap, the levator scap, the pec major minor, the upper cervical extensors. I have a video called Suboccipital Release on YouTube, and that addresses some of those. The sternocleidomastoid, that's your front muscle that you see when people kind of turn their head. It looks like kind of a rope in their neck. The scalenes, which are in the neck, and the subscapularis, which all those promote a little bit more of that forward head, internally rotated, kind of caved in posture like we were talking about, Keoni. So what does that mean? What we want to probably obtain is a nice, I call it a proud posture, where you're leading with your breastbone, your arms are out and open. What's interesting to me, Keoni, and I always run this test, or even as a personal trainer, just kind of made this postural assessment. When we look at all of our anatomy cadavers or anatomical positions always palms up, right? And then the thumbs are pointing away from you. If you look at almost every person walking around, their thumbs are either pointing in towards their pockets or at the very least forward with their nose. So we're in that internally rounded position with those forward tilted shoulder blades. And that's a good postural test you can just assess.
Right. So you see that all the time with people walking.
Yep.
So everybody's kind of, it's just our sitting posture, our we're kind of inflection, right? Body's inflection.
Absolutely. And it speaks to how internally rotated we are and how little awareness we have of how this shoulder should move and work together. Because you should rest in that palm up, thumbs facing out position in theory. That's anatomical position. That's where everything's optimally set up. Maybe now as we've evolved to be more.
So if you're laying down, you should be comfortable in that position, right?
Yeah.
Is that what?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting to me because a lot of times people lay down and they
calm down.
say relax and their arms, their palms will turn and go down.
Right. Yeah. And so that's a sign of that internal rotation.
It's cool.
And it's something you can easily just kind of assess and just pay, as you hear it right now, you look down and notice.
Yeah. Right.
And so that kind of leads into what are the three things that we can do daily to kind of create better shoulder health in the long run, stave off shoulder pain, create that optimal alignment, create optimal muscle balance. And it's being aware first and foremost of kind of what we just talked about. Anatomical neutral is supposedly palms up, thumbs out. So you should be nice and relaxed, and that should be easily achievable for you. And for most people, it's not. And even me, I'm feeling a stretch across my chest as I do it. I feel a little bit of a, tightness and activation of my rhomboids and my middle trap, the muscles in between my shoulder blade. And we should be comfortable operating in that position. And that sets our shoulder up in that arch, all to be well operated and have enough space to clear everything and operate well, right? So we need to be training these kinds of postures. And so far too many of us are in internal rotation. So one of the best things you can do every single day of being a human is do external rotation. So get as much external rotation of your arms as possible, which is that thumbs pointing behind you, kind of open palm look. So you want to rotate your shoulders and arms as much outward or behind you to where your palms would be up. And the cue I give everyone as a personal trainer or physical therapist is we're going to keep our palms up with everything we do, or our thumbs up. And that way you're forcing that
Yeah,
external
thumbs up.
rotation. So you're always trying to drive that external rotation because we spend so much time in internal rotation. And those external rotators are the ones that really help control that orchestra and move eccentrically as we kind of reach forward, we type, we do all that sort of stuff in our daily routine that gets us nice and lengthened and weak in those external rotator muscles. So we need to be strengthening them daily and getting as much external rotation as possible.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I'm sitting here just with my hands externally rotated, and it's you naturally want to roll. I want to roll in.
Yeah. Yep. And it's we've talked about it, the sitting epidemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we want to promote external rotation as much as possible through our day. We can do that with exercises like underhand band pull aparts, face pulls, flasher exercise, just anything that drives that thumb up, open, proud chest, out breastbone type posture, right? Leading with the sternum. And then we also
so extensions, right? Back extensions will kind of help with that too.
Yeah, for sure.
Like chest out, yeah. Kind of like the cobra poses or upward dog poses in yoga.
Yep, absolutely. And if you're doing some, back extensions or back rows, things like that, this is, I started with this, and this is what we want to remember all along the way with our shoulder is start at those shoulder blades. So when we're doing those rows, I try and get people to stop focusing about their elbows, their hands, or how far that bar is moving, and instead try and focus on the lift and activation of your shoulder blades off your back and towards the ceiling, or off of you.
Okay.
Yeah. And I drive movements typically proximal to distal. So I want you to drive it proximally, and then the distal part follows where it may. That, and the rowing example, driving with your shoulder blades, squeezing them together, then working the elbow to bend the weight to you and that sort of thing. So we want to promote external rotation. Even more so with that, what I'd recommend, one of the things you do every single day for good shoulder health throughout your whole life is go through full range of motion. Some great examples of this, I do an exercise I give most of my personal training clients called band arounds. So you just lay on your belly, hold a band out in front of you, and bring the band as far back behind you as possible and come all the way back to the starting position. So you're almost making like a rainbow with your arms as they reach as far back as you can and as far forward as you can. And so that's going through some of that full range.
Is that similar to using like the PVC pipe?
Yep,
and
exactly.
Okay, and just rotating all the way, but to your back and to your waist.
Yep.
Waist
so
to back, waist to back.
I think the way I've seen you guys do it, Keoni, at the gym is you have the PVC pipe, you're standing up, and you just bring it all the way back to your butt and bring it all overhead. So that's the exact same thing. Yep. I'm just saying lay on your belly and activate those shoulder blades with it. So you're getting against gravity with the back. And another example, something else I love with that is the it's called a Y handcuff or a Blackburn. So what you would do, you're again laying on your belly, thumbs pointing up in the start position, and you're making like a Y. Your hands are out in front of you. You're laying on your belly. So now you're in that Superman position, right? You're going to keep your arms off the floor as you bring your arms back like you're in a handcuffed position. So all the way in the small of your back, all the way as far up as you can get them, and you're internally rotating them. So what you're doing is you're going from full flexion, full external rotation. Thumbs are up, starting in that Y position. You're bringing your arms behind you, rotating them all the way inward and bringing them back to the small of your back like you were going to get handcuffed.
So the back of your hand is on the small of your back.
Yep. And then switch the hand that's on top each time with each rep. Do 10 of these. But so that
and you're face down on a mat or something.
Yep, face down on the floor. Those two are taking you through full flexion, extension, all your range of motion as you drive like a big circle with your hand, like in that PVC pipe that you mentioned. And then the other one, the Blackburn or the Y handcuffs, is taking you through full rotation of your shoulders.
Yeah, that's great.
And what I see is people typically have a lot of difficulty with this at the beginning, but man, does it clear right up. And that's why, we see older guys get a lot of arthritis in their shoulders. People get really banged up shoulders, bone spurs and stuff like that. And it comes from
it's unbelievable to me.
Yeah. And it comes
It's
from not
unbelievable to me how
adhering to
many.
this motion is lotion situation.
Yeah.
And that's the truth.
Yeah.
So move these shoulders. And I've seen guys who are 70 years old, can't lift their arm overhead, and in 4 or 5 days can lift their arm overhead, move their shoulders freely just from starting to slowly initiate this type of movement. So move them daily.
So those two exercises, I mean, are pretty much, I mean, you could do them in bed, right? I mean,
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if you wanted to, it might be uncomfortable to sink down face down, but yes.
yeah, but still, it's still working the shoulders to, they're just simple exercises that it seems like you day without taking too much time out of your day.
Yeah,
Keep your
absolutely.
shoulders healthy.
You can roll onto the floor and, I mean, 10 band arounds and 10 Y handcuffs. Boom, boom, boom.
I'm going to definitely start putting that in my stretching classes. I do one stretching class with that I train on actually Wednesday night. So I'll start doing that and see how that does.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's cool.
And if you're doing it all laying down, right, you get that extra component of what I was talking about, working those shoulder blades against gravity, in the hardest position that they could work. Whereas typically, depending on the movement, they may be working against gravity. But if we're standing, gravity's
not so
running
much,
vertically.
Right? Yeah. Right.
So that's, promote external rotation as much as possible in your day-to-day living is number one. Number two is go through that full range of motion. And then number three is work on the scapular stabilization. And then the arm stabilization is also in there. So what am I talking about there? The rotator cuff muscles, but primarily with that scapula stabilization where you see a lot of weakness, lower trap, middle trap, rhomboid major, rhomboid minor, which is all the middle of your back. And people quite often complain of having middle of the back pain, kind of thoracic, general achiness. And a lot of the times working the rhomboids and getting the rhomboids stronger, as well as the traps, get the lower and middle trap, getting them stronger reduces that pain and sets you up for much better shoulder mobility and coordinated movement. And what I see quite often, Keoni, is people, they talk about this ache in their upper back and kind of in their rhomboid region or that middle trap region. And they become fearful of using it, or like moving it exacerbates it. And what they're not doing is actually working those muscles, like the rhomboids specifically. And so what happens is you get further flexed and further internally rotated, and you put these muscles at a poor length tension relationship, and they're super stretched out, and they're unable to respond to the stress you apply to them, or unable to work, to hold their share in that orchestra. And they become achy and naggy and start speaking to you. And the resolution to that, how you shut them up, is not through disuse. It's through actually specifically work in that painful area. If that's the case, if it's that mid shoulder, that kind of ambiguous muscular myofascial mid back ache pain.
Right. Which I see so many times.
Yeah.
So many times.
So working on that, retracting your shoulders, depressing your shoulder blades, that kind of rounds out our day-to-day everything to do. Go through the full range of motion. That includes rotating it, retract the shoulder blades, downwardly rotate and squeeze the shoulder blades down, and get some sort of stretch across the front of the chest, which you're doing when you're doing these exercises.
It's amazing. Like, you listen to you talk. I mean, I actually don't, it's fascinating to me watching people just walk. Everybody is internally rotated. I mean, I've seen some people talk where their palms are completely facing backwards.
Yeah.
Right. And they kind of walk. It's fascinating. And it's not normal, right? That's not the way we should be, right? Where we're walking completely internally rotated.
Yeah. It's not a posture that's going to lead you to long-term health. This is going to put, this is going to lead you to labral tears. This is going to lead you to that biceps tendon being loaded and pulling and tearing that superior aspect of labrum. It's going to lead your coracoacromial arch decreasing in space, all those sorts of things. Yeah, Keoni, I can't go to Disney World or the mall and not watch people.
It's everybody, right? It's pretty much everybody. And some people are so bad or so rotated that it's almost like they're coming all the way around with their hands back again,
Right.
It's like uncomfortable to do.
Yep. Oh yeah.
it's fascinating. So yeah, the shoulder stuff is really important, and it really got me doing my stretch class. Like I am making a habit at least one time a week. We go through the full shoulder range with the PVC pipe. I haven't done it on the ground. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna where you're working against gravity,
Yeah.
doing the Y handcuffs, and like the maybe the PVC pipe out in front of you and coming back while you're laying down, or a
Yeah.
towel or something.
Yeah, and the
Um,
only a caveat to, or just an additional thing is when people are in a lot of discomfort, like a student, for example, who's been sitting studying all day, and they have that ambiguous mid back ache, that muscular ache that I was kind of talking about. I love for them to do these sorts of exercises, not the band rounds or the Y handcuffs, but like scapular retractions, flashers, band pull aparts, those sorts of things on their back on the ground. This way they
oh,
fully relax and start, because a lot of those types of populations, the stressed out student, for lack of a better term, is really forward and tight jawed and a lot of
yeah.
tension. So they almost, if you set them up just like on a bench to do a row, that orchestra is not playing together. So you've got to retrain that orchestra. And for them, a lot of time I've found a lot more success when they start in a position that is easily supportive and supports them fully relaxing. And that's when they can really truly just tune in and start to get to know their rhomboids, or get to know their lower trap, get to know and communicate with these muscles on another level that they haven't connected with mentally.
So do you have some videos on that type of stuff for people,
Yeah.
or a place where
Yep.
they can go? Okay.
Yep. There's
I remember
exercises
when
on
when
YouTube.
we were talking to Barbara Link, the pianist, right?
Yeah.
This is a big issue for her students.
Yep.
So yeah, it's like, and those are pretty simple. So doing those on your back, that seems like that'd be easy anyway. Most people start off sleeping at night on their back.
Yeah, I know we're going really long, but I got to give if I could give everyone an exercise to do every single day, I wish I had a better
Yeah.
name for it, but I just call it the bedtime decompress. So you're laying there on bed, or you're laying there on the bed, face up,
Yeah.
completely relaxed. Ideally, I want you to have your palms up and or just kind of rest your hands on your belly. You're laying there. I want you to tuck your chin, maintain that chin tuck like you're pushing your chin back in your head, back into the pillow. And
Mm-hmm.
while you do this, I want you to be as comfortable and relaxed as possible and supported in your natural spine curvatures. And then I want you to think about pushing the upper third of your humerus. So like your shoulder blades and that upper third of your upper arm bone into the mattress. Hold 1 to 2, 3 seconds, and then relax and perform 15 to 20 of those while keeping the chin tuck as you're retracting and pushing your arms into extension into the mattress. If you're doing this correctly, you should feel some tensions, some working tension, a working burn or a working tension start to accumulate in your rhomboids between your shoulder blades. And you're really opening your chest. You're facilitating that extension, external rotation, that proud forward breastbone posture. And I just do it in bed before I go to sleep. And kind of that's how I count sheep, is doing that little
What, just like
exercise.
one or two times? I mean, how many times does
I'll
it
do them
matter? I mean,
20 or so, but this is
20.
like, if you could do 5 a day, this is going to change people's shoulder health and how much they experience kind of that mid back
Yeah.
ache.
There you go, Dr. Brozy, preventing people from getting shoulder surgery with a simple bedtime exercise, which is huge because I can't tell you how many. Well, first of all, how many women with adhesive capsulitis, and then how many men are constantly getting bone spurs and going in for shoulder surgery?
Yep. Yep. And those
I
bone
mean,
spurs are coming from a bad coordinated orchestra. That's how we're getting these bone spurs in the long run, is that humerus is bumping up against things are touching things because the orchestra isn't all on the same page, playing the same note.
very cool. All right, I will definitely incorporate that in my nighttime routine.
So do your bedtime decompress, move your shoulders, and we'll talk with you next week.
Yeah, take care, guys.
Bye.